So good day, everyone. Thank you for attending this joint webinar. There are about 223 people registered for this webinar event. So we're going to wait 1 minute before we start so we could all join. There will be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so feel free to send in any questions you have during the presentation using the Zoom chat tool. So we're going to wait another minute while people are joining this event. There'll be a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so feel free to send in any questions that you have during the presentation using the Zoom chat tool. So we'll start kicking it off as people join in. So thanks again for attending this webinar on MedTech DFX, Advanced Strategies in Supply Chain Paradigm Shift, being hosted by myself, Chris Montalbano, the CEO of MIDI, and also
Austin Reichert. I'm the area sales manager for Valtronic. Great to be with you this morning, Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, Austin. This is going to be a great webinar. We're looking forward to informing the community about some of the tips and tricks of how to manage the supply chain here. So, and again, there'll be Q&A, so feel free to submit any questions using the Zoom chat tool. So we'll get right into it. So just to fill people in about who MIDI is. So MIDI is expert in medical innovation. So we have over 50 years of development experience with cross-functional teams across various disciplines. And we've completed decades of successful healthcare, medical device development tied to disposables and scientific program development. Much of the innovation is pulled from the customer base. So we've clocked over 10,000 hours of research in hospital, clinic, healthcare, and laboratory environments, and have refined this development process called development DNA, which conforms with the FDA, QSR, and ISO 13485, while at the same time yielding innovation and competitive differentiation for our clientele. Tied to that, it's very important when designing to think about the DFX side of things, DFM, DFA, and we're going to expand upon DFX in this particular webinar, with one of the most important ones being the design for supply chain component of DFX and some of the tips and tricks that both Valtronic and MIDI have deployed during these COVID times and supply chain issue times to help mitigate issues. So at MIDI, we're believers in executive program management and communication. That's key to the success of the programs we work on, and the concept of sourcing, qualifying, and managing contract manufacturers.
Well, Chris, I see an awful lot of similarities in the history and style of our two companies. Valtronic has a 40-year history of manufacturing excellence, and we have really evolved into a focus on medical device printed circuit board assemblies, and then the assemblies that roll up into the medical devices. So we look at that as our focus now. And, you know, as we've grown as a company, we now have a global footprint with 3 locations, the North American location being in Solon, Ohio. And when you're doing medical devices, class 1, 2, and 3, you really have to focus on quality. And so we too have that ISO 13485 focus and certification. We're also FDA registered. And what that means is we can build medical devices, and we don't shy away from those class 3 devices. As we've continued to grow and find new ways to add value, we've started building more of the complex medical systems. So you'll see us tackling actually the jobs and the assembly of the device in our facilities. And I think not to be underestimated, the capacity for supply chain management really is a value and a focus for us, and building out that quality supplier base so that we have suppliers and partners to rely on. And then we round that out with engineering and test capabilities, both internally and developing test strategies for customers. And our newest value add really wraps around aftermarket support services. And this is one way that Valtronic has grown their portfolio and developed new relationships and expanded the current customer relationships. So those are just some of the highlights about Valtronic, and looking forward to hearing more about our agenda and getting right into it.
All right, thanks, Austin. So agenda-wise, first we'll start off with the paradigm shift in medical device supply chain and what's occurring there. And then segue into design for excellence, DFX, solving for that X, because one of the key X's in that is DFSC, design for supply chain. So we're going to be hitting and addressing advanced strategies from that regard. Then we're going to move into special considerations for PC boards. So electronics have been some of the hardest hit as related to trying to get your medical devices to market. Lastly, we'll try to show some relevant case studies as related to these applications, both Valtronic and MIDI case studies, and then get into some of the Q&A. So what we'd like to do is jump right into the paradigm shift in medical device supply chain. So unforeseen disruption due to COVID. So the past 2 years introduced challenges unlike before in the modern era. COVID not only ravaged the world's population, but caused unimaginable disruption to our way of life, crippling the vital network that supplies goods and materials to every company and consumer on Earth. So today, the global supply chain is in dire straits, still suffering shortages in materials and labor, spurred by the earliest shutdown periods. So manufacturers now face historically high costs across the board of operation, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine only exacerbated the situation. So there's a more urgent need for medical devices now challenged by the supply chain disruption. In the world of medical technology, this COVID period includes a mad dash to respond to the most significant public health crisis of the past century, and a trial by fire in doing so under supply conditions rapidly and severely decaying. So with innovative health solutions needed more than ever, device developers quickly realized that the manufacturing strategies championed pre-pandemic held a fatal flaw. They neglected supply chain resilience. So the high pressure situation with this trial by fire methods and approaches developed over the last 2.5 years. So at MIDI, this high pressure situation became an opportunity to create and pressure test a stalwart approach to bringing medical devices to market with minimal delays and at acceptable cost, while ensuring our clients' long-term viability and business success in these changing supply circumstances. Now, the focus begins with design for excellence, DFX. Well, beginning by focusing on design for excellence, this DFX, a methodology in which particular concerns are prioritized early in the development process and accommodated throughout, operationalized under MIDI's ISO 13485 quality management system called development DNA. Now, when it comes time for design for excellence and the programmatic advantages thereof, so number one, it yields shorter development times. Second, lower development costs. Thirdly, smoother transitions into production. Also, improved device quality. But the one we're going to be focusing a lot on today is the application of DFX on reducing supply chain risk. So later on in this webinar, it's that fifth programmatic advantage that we'll be focusing on, explaining how to leverage DFX to address that supply chain paradigm shift. Now, in operationalizing DFX in a medical device development program, and how to have it conform with the FDA's design control ISO 13485. It's very key that it blends into your quality management system. So to effectively operationalize DFX, a programmatic approach must be deployed that allows for various development activities to occur alongside each other concurrently, rather than versus a traditional method that operates sequentially, such as a waterfall design process. So at MIDI, we employ this concurrent development approach with two principles guiding its execution. One, considering the entire life cycle of a device early in the design process, including deployment of DFX. And secondly, performing all development activities, including DFX, simultaneously, meaning concurrently, rather than consecutively, or as you could call it, sequentially. So let's unpack this a bit. If familiar with the FDA's design control guidance for medical device development, this information may seem contradictory. After all, the waterfall design process is an example of proper design control implementation. Yet closer examination will reveal that the FDA's use of the sequential model is simply a matter of providing a more easily understood illustration of their requirements. The FDA actually acknowledges concurrent engineering as a valid and effective engineering strategy, particularly lauding the benefits of the iterative design process, agile process, and its included quality control feedback loops. While noting the necessity of proper QMS integration and the additional complexity involved in reviews, approvals, and verification while operating under this approach, the FDA has nonetheless stamped this agile development methodology with their official seal of approval. So under MIDI's development DNA approach, meaning the innovation roadmap, it acts as the product realization standard operating procedure, fully detailing the proper implementation of our concurrent engineering strategy in procedural steps paired with block diagrams. This proven path to success is part of the agile development methodology that allows us to help clients bring medical devices to market quickly, safely, and efficiently. Now, what are the X components in DFX? So most commonly known simply as DFX, designed for excellence. It's widely used to identify and formally address factors that are intimately related to the device's attributes when considered in the scope of its complete life cycle. So the X, or excellence in this case, is not a set value or standard, but a variable definable on a case-by-case basis. With efficacy, safety, and costs reigning supreme in medical technology, DFX in medical device development is a means of prioritizing the most important goals of development, beginning at the project start and continuing throughout its lifetime. So each design approached under our development D methodology is optimized for DFX factors during development stages, from concept through to production. But how does one address something like manufacturing or usability before a design is finalized? So let's examine the DFX variables and how they'll be preemptively addressed and why medical device developers should look to do so. So looking at DFM and DFA, design for manufacture and design for assembly, entail a process of weighing functional requirements against production capabilities. And they're aimed at ensuring a device will be produced in appropriate quantities at acceptable costs before entering total production. So accordingly, DFM materials should be considered based on their method of manufacture, and alternatives should be thoroughly explored while considering the projected quantities produced per year. Now on the DFA, this requires assessing preliminary assembly approaches and evaluating various methods for efficiency and reliability while maintaining a focus on design margin optimization. These DFX activities should initiate under an agile development approach during the proof of concept and prototyping phases to iteratively de-risk and enhance the results of later production phases. Now, DFC, designed for cost optimization, another DFX. So while cost is a constant concern in most DFX methods, DFSC is distinguished as an independent variable to stress the importance of some of the specific development techniques that have been proven to substantially reduce BOM costs while performed preemptively. These include focusing on high-cost components and assemblies during the design, engaging early on with vendors to pinpoint the DFM and DFA methods available that will be most easily converted to readily available and deployable industry practices, and also takes into account carefully minding targeted production costs and target market price sensitivities, which can often be found through competitive benchmarking analysis. Now, DFT and DFU, designed for testability and designed for usability, design iterations are constantly produced under an agile development approach to rapidly de-risk various features and assemblies. So to comply with ISO 13485, a tight grip must be kept on design control documentation, including a list of system requirements distilled into the design inputs. Those must be used to generate verification and validation parameters. DFT and DFU then are key to these parameters, with DFT concerning verification and DFU pertains to validation. So bearing influence in the proof of concept, prototyping stages, and production level, the results of these activities are contingent upon establishing an early emphasis on balancing functional requirements with the ease of verifying and validating your device. Now, DFS, designed for service, critically important to avoid additional costs and potential safety hazards in the long term. DFSC is concerned with making preparations for a device's extended life cycle. So at MIDI, most development programs optimize for DFS by integrating a robust service approach within the device in the form of the Internet of Medical Things capability, which enables remote diagnostics and allows for passive, minimally invasive attendance with a high level of risk mitigation. DFR, designed for reliability under the development DNA approach, MIDI's ISO 13485 quality management system includes a SOP, a standard operating procedure dubbed product realization, which details our agile development method procedures called the innovation roadmap. So under there, that roadmap, DFR, can be found in the early implementation of a highly detailed risk identification approach known as failure mode and effects analysis, or FMEA. This method utilizes our matrix requirements cloud-based design history file to detail and track all potentialities. Next, we'll focus on the DFSC, which is the main focus of this presentation, the DFX component of DFSC, designed for supply chain, which leads us to the heart of the presentation. So while the circumstances of the past years have impacted nearly every aspect of life as we know it, no DFX strategy has been as changed as that element, the DFSC. And the ingredients for success now much different than they were pre-pandemic. So historically, just in time, or we'll call it JIT manufacturing, paired with lean inventory management, has been widely regarded as the best and most efficient production model available to medical device companies, paying dividends and save material and overhead costs. Yet the JIT model is simply incompatible with the supply chain today. Key suppliers are finding themselves unable to deliver materials in a timely fashion, if at all, and the companies relying on them have been left in the lurch without any safety stock to speak of, neither of critical components nor finished components. So the fact is, models of manufacturing widespread in the medical device industry rely on a level of modern convenience and abundance that, thanks to COVID and now global conflict, no longer exists. So rather than focusing on reducing cost and increasing efficiency, medical device companies should now be looking to the fundamentals of production, taking steps to ensure long-term sustainability and installing safeguards against future disruption. Now at MIDI, we found the key to doing so successfully is integrating preparation and contingency planning as core tenets of your operating methods and coordinating a company-wide effort to prioritize them, weaving them into new strategic modes of operation disseminated from corporate to engineering, manufacturing, and supply. But what exactly does this entail? What steps can you take to ensure resilience when facing uncertain supply? So MIDI's advanced DFSC strategies operationalized under development DNA and detailed within our ISO 13485 QMS is a distillation of the best of these risk mitigation techniques. We'll start with this: rethink your strategy for inventory management. So in order to retain the benefits of JIT while preparing for ongoing supply chain issues, consider adopting strategies towards replenishing stock that will ensure the existence of a safety stock without high cost or effort. As an example, Johnson & Johnson currently employs a quote-unquote sell one, stock one policy in which products are restocked as they are sold, integrating safety stock to maintain regular stock rather than setting it aside continuously. It's important to note that for success, this policy requires inventory be continuously moving and should not be used to cover ordinary production unless approved of at the executive level. Another tip, increasing supplier count. So move towards an increase in the number of suppliers you source from at a component level. Secondary sourcing was the standard. Now a move towards tertiary and quaternary components and supplier sourcing is needed. Of course, all of the suppliers need to comply with the regulatory scrutiny of the medical market and your ISO 13485 QMS vendor onboarding process. Another tip, diversify your suppliers, especially by geography. So the shutdowns and border crossings cascaded across the globe throughout the pandemic and have shown the risks inherent in relying too heavily on particular suppliers. Those risks only grow as geopolitical circumstances evolve each day. Now, most organizations lack the visibility into the structure of their supply chains. For example, their main suppliers have sub-suppliers, and those suppliers have a cascading set of additional suppliers. So companies that shift from reactively addressing catastrophic supply chain events to putting preventive technology-based supply chain risk monitoring and mapping solutions in place will end up more resilient. So independent distributors, so they should be considered as part of the supply chain. And particularly in the case of critical level electronic components and other high demand commodities such as memory and CPU. So traditional distribution channels like ODMs have been struggling to obtain and deliver components in the face of today's unprecedented difficulties. So taking on an independent distributor and working with these channels is key to ensuring complete coverage, as these partners specialize in tackling the challenges of their industry. They also usually come with benefits such as utilize procurement intelligent platforms that act as monitoring towers, meaning cloud-based real-time monitoring data systems tied to their global supply chain connections, enabling faster and more informed preemptive decisions in response to PCB shortages. Also, deploying more stringent quality control methods to ensure the quality and authenticity of delivered components. This includes thorough testing and screening process, and of course, continuously examining the end of life as related to components and the growing wave of obsolescence given the times. And this final tip here, and then Austin is going to go through even more depth on tips and tricks here. Purchase pivot, obtaining supplier early in the larger quantities. So one strategy MIDI employs with the new medical device developments is purchasing components with each development iteration of the device and doing so in quantities enough for an entire year's worth of production, particularly critical parts and assemblies that must be acquired at a system level. Although designs will evolve over iterations, the majority of components will remain unchanged, thus requiring only acquisition of the modified components. In this manner, most of the required components will be en route during development and guaranteed for production's entire first year. For this strategy to succeed, corporations must institute a robust demand forecast analysis program to ensure engineering and manufacturing can correctively estimate preemptive order quantities. So to continue bringing innovative medical devices to market for those who need them most, developers must be aware of these supply chain challenge issues and be prepared to address them. So operationalized under MIDI's development DNA product realization platform, DFX and DFSC are powerful tools for ensuring supply chain resilience. It's paired with the adaptability, capability, and foresight required to succeed in these challenging times. So what I'd like to do next, Austin will provide us with special considerations and insight for our supply chain.
Well, thanks, Chris. As I listened to your conversation with the audience and as you presented your material there, I'm reminded of how important it is to have a strategy in that design phase. There are so many considerations that you raised up there for people to be aware of. It really is a complex opportunity to develop in today's environment. So a strategy like that is absolutely critical. And the other thing that struck me as you were talking was the need for elevating supply chain decisions to the highest level of executive management in the companies that you're doing business with. It is absolutely strategic. Sometimes I think we get lulled to sleep that we can buy everything we need and have it delivered the next day. We've been spoiled with the Amazon truck in our neighborhood just circulating and dropping stuff off. It really makes you think about the changes that have happened that you talk about with COVID. Before I start, I'm reminded one of my colleagues in sales said to me, you know, it's really an interesting development time because we're absolutely designing for flexibility. We're designing for allocation. And so your terminology, you know, designing for the supply chain has to have those things built right in. Let me give you a couple of tips that as a contract manufacturer, we have used and worked with, and I think it'll highlight the actual dovetail of the strategy for us as a builder of devices, as a manufacturer of devices, along with the design side, because we certainly see that impact when people bring us their designs for manufacturing. So first thing I would tell you is review the bill of materials for longevity early, and don't rely on just spot checks in the web space. Use a tool like Silicon Expert. There are others, of course, but Silicon Expert is a great one because it highlights not only the availability, but the development cycle that the actual part is in, and it gives you the manufacturer's expected lifetimes. And it's a great tool for looking at things for the future in your design. The second bullet point there, really it's start early to build in flexibility. And I think you highlighted that well in the strategy that you outlined there. You have to be able to maneuver. And in the medical device environment, there's constraints for that, but you have to have those built-in fallback positions should things change. Allocations happen, the difference in the world environment right now. Too many things can happen too quickly. And I think that really starts with an attitude of an open mind, right? Looking towards component substitutions as part of the process rather than an anomaly. And here's something that happens in my world, and it's really a wonder and a great thing when I see designers and builders coming to us early in the process. When we can get a look at that BOM, when we can take a look at it and make sure it's going to go through the manufacturing process, when we have a good understanding of that product early, it makes a huge difference. And so many times pre-COVID, I think the choice of a manufacturing partner was really a last minute decision. Oh, we'll just go out and get the builder of choice, and it's not a good strategy for medical devices, especially in today's time frame. So leveraging your relationship is absolutely critical. And the only way you can do that is involving them early and often. This one that I came across most recently here in the additional strategies. Again, my colleague highlighted this for me. He said, you really need to take a look at the feature set of your design and decide, are they critical to your competitive advantage, or are they simply incremental? Because sometimes those decisions that you make affect the part you need to build in. And sometimes you need to skip a rev or think in terms of long-term development, and make sure that you're getting the parts you need to build for the features that you must have versus the ones that you want to have. And then there's a great strategy right from the start, which is start using more of the in-stock standard materials. Don't get yourself into special order situations that put you at a higher risk. So those are some things that overall, I would say, make an impact and really kind of complement what you presented for our audience today. So roll ahead. I want to talk about using supply chain partnerships with some of the non-traditional avenues that people didn't really think of very often. You talked about using independent distributors, and certainly a contract manufacturer relies on them. We have relationships with all of those distribution partners. And one of the things you want to do is make sure you exhaust all those avenues. There's no excuse for not making sure that you don't exhaust your relationship to see where those traditional sources have parts and where they can get them for you. But when all escalations fail, there is a channel that you can use and that good contract manufacturers are using today and have used for many years, and that is to go out to the broker market. And once you've got all the written approvals in place and everybody knows what you're doing for particular parts, going out to brokers can make a difference between getting to market on time and being late. And I think there's some highlights that we can share with people, and that is you want to have pre-qualified brokers in your tool set, whether that's with your CM, your partner, or whether you have that in your own supply chain group. Having them pre-qualified is important, and then making sure that those partners are using best practices. And a couple of them to highlight there, there's memberships in trusted supplier databases. The ERAI, I wrote it down just to be sure I'd have it, the Electronic Retail Association International. They have a great database that has information you can use to choose your suppliers wisely. GuideUp is a government focused group. They look at all the government military suppliers and medical suppliers as well. And then IDEA is the Independent Delivery of Electronics Association, and they're the ones that train and certify people to inspect the parts that you're getting from this market. They're going to test and look for parts that have met the standard of this AS6081, making sure that the parts are not counterfeit. And trust me, there are people who are opportunists. You see it in every market, whether it's ticket brokering or parts brokering. There are people who take advantage of the market, and you want to protect against that. So you want to deal with people who have demonstrated and have invested in their business for a trusted supplier relationship. And that happens at the OEM level, it happens at the contract level, and it happens at the design level. And then there's a great political expression attributed to a president, which is trust but verify, right? you always want to make sure that if you're going to buy these parts and you've checked the supplier relationships and you're using trusted suppliers and partnerships, that you get a test report. And then you can drop that down into a circuit and actually test for the fact that that component, even though it has the same specs, is going to work in your circuit. And you should have an expectation of actually paying for that service. It's something that you need to build into your methodology so that you pay for that service and think of it as insurance. You really want to make sure that you don't get caught out in a lurch and not be able to bring those parts into your production design. So trust but verify. So do everything you can to use parts from the sources you've built up over time. If you have to use brokers, make sure you're using quality brokers. They've been a secondary market for partners for a long time. And then make sure you trust and verify. I think as you go out to some of the market trends here, I wanted to give you a sense. You highlighted it a little bit in your opening there. Certainly COVID has changed our strategies. And even today, there's new outbreaks that happen and certain countries will shut down or certain geographic locations. We've seen that in Asia. And so there's lingering COVID issues that are out there. I don't think anybody would say that we're out of the woods yet and we're back to normal. They like to talk about we're getting there, but we're certainly not there yet. And the complication that's come up that I find so fascinating is this idea of labor shortages and capacity issues. Some days I've gone to the local coffee shop and even some of the franchises, and you find them closed because there's nobody to staff the location after hours. They just don't have enough people. So all kinds of impact you're seeing in the labor market there. And technology's on a march. Chris, I think you and I are both challenged and excited by the fact that new markets like 5G and the Internet of Things, electric vehicles, sports cars, which you're a fan of, they are gobbling up all kinds of parts in the market, and there's no sign that that's going to abate anytime soon. And the transportation market, when you think back to how many months ago it was, just a few months ago, you saw those ships stacked up on the harbor. There's a shortage of truck drivers. So logistics and material delivery, they're real issues that we're dealing with right now. Raw material shortages, we're seeing fewer of them, but they're still out there. You still can't let your guard down because they're going to pop up and cause allocations. They're going to cause price increases. And these kinds of things need to be built into your planning, just like you outlined using your strategy there. Some of the positive things that are happening in the market, it is a yin and yang, a balancing of the market. You'll see some things happen. You'll see an easing of certain supply chain issues in ports. You'll see certain manufacturers and industries come back online. So you're seeing some increased capacity. I think the exciting news in the Ohio marketplace is new fab plants going in, but those are still out on the horizon. So you have to be aware of what's going on in the global marketplace, even though you're building in the US or you're building in a fairly stable environment. I think those things are market awareness issues, and certainly they're trending in a positive way as we catch up and get out of this COVID shutdown mentality that we were in. But here's something I want to point out to you. Lots of OEMs, big important customers, big important developers of electronic devices, they saw this coming a while ago. I was talking to a supply chain colleague of mine, and he talked about how he went to his management and told them that they needed to double down on their orders. And not only that, but many of those people doubled down with 2 different vendors. So they were assured of having parts. That's a part of your strategy, which was increasing your supplier count and making sure that you had actionable purchase orders. And we're starting to see that level out a little bit. Some of those orders are getting canceled. Those parts are coming back online and into the safety net of the distribution market and being picked up now and normalized. but that'll take some time. It's kind of like the, a good storm system. It takes a while for it to clear out, and the momentum can swing. You have to watch out for the political things that you mentioned, like the conflict in the Ukraine. Certainly inflation is having an impact on what we're doing in transportation costs. And I think you have to be aware of the larger environment. So as I look at this, my thought process goes to the fact that you really have to watch the bottom line with these concepts and how they're going to impact you. I see manufacturers requiring hard purchase orders and deposits. That's something that people aren't used to, and deposits of 30 to 50% are not unusual. And shipping costs have gone up, along with the taxes and tariffs. So really tricky environment, but one that has opportunity, one that has some positive impact coming. And I want you to think about something else as we transition to that next slide. So I like looking at this supplier management process as a way to programatize, as you talk about a strategy and putting a program in place, and the due diligence that's required. A lot of times companies say they have a policy, but they don't follow it, or they don't follow it for all their parts. They follow it for a couple of critical parts or a couple of easy parts that are sourced locally to them. So if you start on the sourcing side, you really have to do a risk assessment of your suppliers. And I think that's the one that I would highlight for you, along with a financial screening of your partners. Don't be afraid to ask for a financial review. They look to a credit review of you as a customer. So it's an equal opportunity assessment there. And then the qualification strategy, I look at this as, we got to get on site again, building those relationships personally, to get your approved supplier database in place. Just like you, as you design in parts, have a reputation for quality, they have a reputation for longevity. And that scorecard that you see as the second bullet from the bottom there, it's a factor in both the qualification and in the performance management. So as you jump ahead, you want to make sure you're monitoring effectively and objectively the suppliers that you're doing business with. And I think of suppliers and parts almost interchangeably. So you want to make sure you're evaluating the parts and the partners simultaneously, to get a feel for who's going to deliver on time, who's going to deliver a quality product, who's going to be reliable. And that matters whether it's a distributor or an OEM or a contract management firm. Any of those people that you're using need to be evaluated in your ecosystem. And that's why it's so important to have your executives involved from the very beginning. Supply chain needs to be elevated to the head table for sure. These issues affect getting product to market on time, and they affect revenues downstream. It's not just a last minute decision of where you're going to source out some prototype parts. This is strategic to the business. So portfolio management means monitoring, watching for risks, using the strategies and the programs that different suppliers have to bring your product to market, and then blending that across global supply chains if you need to. And that's one of the things that I love about Valtronic, is the idea that we've got a global supply chain, 3 different supply chain teams working to coordinate efforts and bring in parts. So time is a critical factor. And lastly, here's a fun thought. Here's a trusted industry veteran of mine said, I don't know how many times I have gone to meetings and parts have been designed in that are on the downside slope of their life cycle. So manage for the parts that are entering the system on their upside, because time is the critical factor now, and your partners are not your adversaries. They really are part of your ecosystem, and you should build those relationships like you build them with good neighbors. So from a kind of a summary standpoint, it's partnerships, it's process, it's relationships, and it's building in flexibility right from the start are some of the things that I've seen really make a difference in our customer set. And I think we've got a couple of examples coming up, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Austin. And actually, one of the questions that came in, because we're going to have a Q&A session later, but it relates to the next set of slides. And the question was from Mike, can you give any specific examples of situations where MIDI and Valtronics had to overcome obstacles during development and commercialization for a client program?
Well, there's certainly opportunity for that. And we've been partners now for going on 4 years, almost 5 years. And the trust that we've built up has really made a difference when you can make a call and get some critical information to make decisions in real time. So let me take you through this case study here. I can't name the company, but you'd be surprised how interesting and timely our conversation is. We had a company come to us with a challenge. And the challenge was they needed an overall reduction in size. They wanted to reduce the overall volume of the device that they were building, and they needed to increase power efficiency. And if I could define a market trend in medical devices, I think that would be it right there. Improve my power efficiency, make it run longer, and make it smaller so it's easier to use in the body or wrapped around the body. So classic challenge. Then they needed a design that would bridge the gap and get them to the product upgrade that they're going to do down the road. So they used Valtronic and our expertise to help them evaluate the BOM, look for obsolescence, and make choices on the parts so that we could build in the kind of longevity and access to supply of parts that are going to make a difference for them. So those are things that really go together. And this interim design really ties back to that idea of looking at feature sets of what I must have and what I'd like to have. So if you focus on the things you must have first, those critical parts that feed into that feature set, then you can look and see what's the availability for the minor features. And that's going to be a critical decision in how you move forward. I think the other thing that even you talked about, and I'll highlight again here, is there's no excuse for being slow to market. You have to hit the market at the right time. And so this designing of the feature set and getting your name and brand out there makes a difference. So therefore, you really have to have a rapid transition into full manufacturing, and you can't do that waiting on parts. I think I already talked about that, managing features, and you talked about it a couple of times. It's optimizing cost. I think you have to be aware that in tough times and in challenging times, to get parts where you need them and to lock them and secure them, you're going to need to pay a little bit more and put deposits down and hard POs and commitments. But that's all part of the process in achieving that targeted BOM cost and making sure you can get to market. And the last thing is, it's an ongoing strategy for Valtronic to evaluate our suppliers and our brokers who are performing. We now have a 2.5-year history to build on to the previous 30 years that we've had looking at partnerships. And I think you're seeing here a real-time example and a real example of a customer coming to us with the challenges you outlined and the things that we talked about as ways to look forward and get product to market. So I'm really interested to see what you're going to talk about in your case study. I know that this one for me is an exciting opportunity, and I look forward to more like them.
Well, thanks, Austin. Very insightful information, intriguing case study. Thanks for all of that. What you see here is, it's called the stim clip, and it's worn on the ear. And the stim clip stimulates the auricular branch of the vagus nerve. So based upon different proprietary stimulus protocol, it provides a method of treating patients that have high blood pressure, depression, tinnitus, and it's paired with an app that utilizes biomarker information to provide for a closed loop feedback control system. So the challenge here was during these COVID times is when designing this with PCB level components constraints, if you were not preemptive in acquiring large component volumes, even during alpha prototype round, you were forced to redesign the schematic to work with alternate components because of part strategy effects. So what we found is by prospecting on what the first year's production run would be, we were able to acquire that volume of components even during the alpha stage, knowing that more than traditionally 85% of those components would remain unchanged when the design evolved to the pilot production or beta stage. So this gave us a leg up and avoided the loss of time to market on schematic layout and rework, and the opportunity cost of lost sales. So it was well worth purchasing those components up front, taking a hit on the cost of around, I'll say 15% of those components, so you wouldn't have those lost sales. So before we move to the Q&A session, we'd like to conclude by saying that, following a preemptively configured supply chain mitigation protocol earlier in your device development process will ease entry into manufacturing and provide for more certain revenue stream upon launch to market. Of course, this methodology wants to be instituted under your product realization SOP, meaning standard operating procedure within your ISO 13485 QMS, using a DFX approach as described today. So MIDI's development DNA medical device development approach and Valtronic's quality manufacturing procedures and implementation assist our clients in mitigating these risks so that they achieve a successful market launch. Now, we're going to enter the Q&A session now. We have a bunch of questions which have come in. Let's take a look at these questions. Actually, what we did is we assimilated some of these questions together for this first round because they were sort of similar. So this question was from Danielle, which was also asked by Paul, Philip, Pierre, and Amanda. So this question must really be resonating out there. So the question was, we're having issues with the development turnaround time due to prototype design challenges and with component shortages compounding the long delivery lead times. How could that be addressed? Well, this is definitely an issue. So pre-COVID, the normal course of development involved identifying components, utilizing them in your design, your emerging design, obtaining low quantities or samples to then build into your alpha prototype, testing, and then optimizing the design with other beta prototype spins. If you were to do this post-COVID, it would require multiple key components that might be missing from the supply chain, and you would need to redesign the parts of your system. This is one of the reasons prototype turnaround time is taking longer. So the mitigation is to stage your workflow in a different order. So when you go to order your alpha prototype quantities, instead of ordering low quantities, preemptively order enough to cover you for part or all of the first year's production. So doing this involves multiple stakeholders within the company, from the development team, sales, purchasing, executive level, due to the expenditure size, although it will allow for rapid time to market and more certainty when it comes to the production launch. So by the way, you go into this approach knowing certain components may not end up getting utilized by the time you make it through beta prototype and into production, although the majority of the components will. So this cost, which is incurred, is significantly less than the cost of delayed sales or the cost of lost sales. So thanks for those questions. There's an additional question here from John in Madison, Wisconsin. And that is, how do contract manufacturers like Valtronics evaluate their suppliers?
It's a key question because it's a strategy that is part of our quality management system. It's part of our DNA, to coin the similar phrase there. It's making sure that you have a scorecard that evaluates them on the things that are significant, the on-time delivery, making sure that you're getting exact quantities and that the documentation is in place. You want to make sure that you do on-site reviews with these folks so that you build out a scorecard similar to a quality audit. You know, there's always a quality audit question that pops up in new relationships for contract manufacturers. So there's always going to be a supplier relationship. And it turns out you need that as a scorecard, not only for a starting point, but managing expectations, how you move forward and how you know whether a supplier is performing on time. Because you may have multiple people dealing with a particular vendor, different people placing orders. So you don't want to have one person experiencing a good relationship and not seeing any problems, but the issues at the dock are poor packaging, poor documentation, poor communication and responsiveness. So build out that supplier scorecard. That's going to give you an ability to evaluate objectively and manage them going forward.
Well, thanks, Austin. Here's another question. It's an interesting question, a little off the topic, but a great question. So we'd love to answer it. So the question is from Marcus in Cambridge. Where do you find your inspiration for medical device innovation, and does the FDA compliance damper that innovation? Wow. Okay, so just
That's
briefly.
a fun one.
Yeah. So just briefly, so we've configured our development DNA process to not only comply with the FDA, but also to yield innovation design results. So in this regard, one area of innovation inspiration is in observing user needs, that workflow environment and task analysis, pre-use, during use, post-use. Also use of direct or indirect competitive systems and learning from them, the best of their features, the worst of them, to learn what not to do and what potentially to do better. And of course, I'm sure you all know the documentation of user requirements is an FDA requirement anyway, but really leverage that information you collect. And then we have time for one more question, and then the webinar time is coming to a close. So this question is from Laura in Palo Alto, California. What are some considerations when using brokers, when brokers become necessary?
Well, we highlighted that during the conversation, and it's an important topic. So it's a good question that bears repeating, and that is know your broker. These folks have built a business around supplying a secondary market for parts. They have to have a reputation. They have to have financial wherewithal, and they have to adhere to standards. And you want to look for those broker relationships that really don't show up in the problem file in the databases. You want to see them in the databases as being a positive company to do business with, and you want to test them out. It's never a good idea to wait till you have a disaster to go figure out if something's going to work. Make sure you turn the pump on before the water comes, right? You don't want to be sitting in a flood looking for a pump that works. You want to make sure your pump works, and you want to test it. You want to make sure everything's in good working order. So I would say that when you're evaluating brokers, evaluate them like a good supplier, because they're going to be your partner in uncertain times. And today, as Chris mentioned and I've mentioned, you just never know where the problem's going to show up, whether it's political or local, or transport, or just a new design and an allocation.
So just to let everybody know, we'll be following up with an email containing the link to this webinar. And if you would be interested in MIDI's white paper on the subject we just covered, feel free to email me, and I'll forward that to you. Also, keep a lookout for new insightful podcast series. MIDI launches in 2 weeks. You could register on our website, midipd.com, under the Innovation Vault to keep up to date on these launches. And we all, from MIDI and Valtronic's end, we very much thank you for attending today.
Thanks very much, Chris, for the hosting job that you did. And I look forward to those connections that we're going to make post webinar.
Absolutely. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye for
Bye-bye.
now.